Captain Lisa Morgan stood on the bridge of the battleship Valiant and watched the tactical display with complete focus. The screen showed 3 Krovan heavy cruisers moving toward her position near the Deneb system. Behind those cruisers came 15 smaller escort ships. The Council had sent them to enforce their trade embargo against human vessels. They were coming to make an example of any humans who refused to obey Council orders. Lieutenant Kyle Bennett worked at his console and reported the status of the approaching enemy fleet. The Krovan ships were using standard Council battle formations, 3 defensive layers with the flagship positioned safely in the center. Everything was predictable and organized exactly the way Council military doctrine required. The enemy was also trying to communicate with the Valiant. Lisa told him to open the communication channel. The face of Fleet Commander Zexthar appeared on the main screen. His sensory fronds were arranged in a pattern that the translation software identified as confident superiority. He clearly believed that his 18 ships would easily defeat 1 human vessel. Commander Zexthar spoke with authority. He ordered Captain Morgan to withdraw from the Deneb system immediately. If she refused to comply, his forces would seize her ship and imprison her entire crew. This was standard Council procedure for dealing with species that violated their edicts. He expected the human captain to recognize the superiority of his numbers and retreat. Lisa allowed herself a small smile. She told the commander that she would save them both some time. The Valiant was not leaving this system. Her crew was not surrendering. Humans were not asking for permission to be in this space or any other space they chose to visit. The Deneb system was unclaimed territory, and humans had every right to be there. Commander Zexthar's fronds rippled in what might have been amusement. He said that Captain Morgan had 1 ship while he commanded 18. Her bravery was admirable, but her position was foolish. This was his final warning. She had 1 chance to turn around and leave peacefully. Lisa's smile faded and her voice became very quiet. She said no. This was actually the commander's final warning. He should turn his fleet around and go back to Council space. If he fired even 1 shot at her ship, he would be starting a war that the Council could not win. She meant every word. The Krovan commander's mandibles spread wide in his species' version of laughter. He said that humans were as arrogant as they were primitive. He ordered all his vessels to target the Terran ship and prepare to disable its engines. He would take this human captain back to Council space in chains and use her as an example to other species who thought about defying Council authority. The communication channel closed. Lisa took a deep breath and gave her next order. She told Lieutenant Bennett to execute something called Echo Protocol. The lieutenant smiled and said it would be his pleasure. He had been waiting for this moment. What happened next would shock the entire Galactic Council and change how every species thought about human capabilities. The space around the Valiant seemed to shimmer and distort. Suddenly, 18 additional human ships appeared out of nowhere. They had been there the entire time, completely invisible to Krovan sensors. They had been waiting in stealth mode for the perfect moment to reveal themselves. The Terran Defense Force had learned something very important during humanity's rapid expansion into space. Every species in the Galactic Council fought using the same doctrines and tactics that were thousands of years old. They used predictable formations. They followed standardized engagement protocols. They believed in honorable face-to-face combat where both sides could see each other clearly. Humans had no such traditions because humans were new to space warfare. They had no ancient customs to follow. They had no honorable codes that restricted how they fought. They only cared about results. They only cared about winning. Everything else was just decoration. The Krovan formation fell apart in the first 30 seconds of combat. Human ships moved in ways that seemed impossible. Their enhanced engines allowed acceleration that turned the vessels into weapons themselves. They dodged and weaved through space in patterns that Krovan gunners could not predict or track. Their weapons were brutal rather than elegant. Krovan shields had been designed to dissipate energy weapons like lasers and plasma cannons. They were not designed to stop solid tungsten rods fired at a significant fraction of light speed. Those metal rods punched through shields like they were not even there. They tore through armor plating. They created massive holes in the hulls of Krovan ships. Atmosphere vented into space. Fires broke out on multiple decks. Ships that had seemed invincible moments ago were now crippled and dying. Commander Zexthar's flagship had the heaviest armor in the fleet. It absorbed hit after hit from human weapons. Its shields flickered and failed, but the ship kept fighting. The commander probably thought his superior construction would save him. He was wrong. When the Valiant itself finally fired its main weapon, everything changed. The experimental railgun round was larger and faster than anything else in the battle. It hit the flagship at tremendous speed and punched completely through the ship from bow to stern. The round entered at the front and exited at the back, creating a tunnel of destruction through every deck it passed. The entire battle lasted exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds. When it ended, 3 Krovan cruisers were destroyed completely. 12 escort ships were either destroyed or too damaged to move. Only 3 vessels managed to escape, and they were trailing atmosphere and debris as they limped away toward Council space. Lisa watched the retreating ships on her tactical display. She felt the weight of what had just happened. The Council had expected a small skirmish. They had expected an easy victory that would force humanity back to the negotiating table. They had expected to arrest a human captain and use her as a warning to others. Instead, they had just lost most of a fleet in less than 5 minutes. Instead, they had just learned that human ships could hide from their sensors. Instead, they had just discovered that human weapons could tear through their defenses like paper. Lisa ordered Lieutenant Bennett to send a message on all Council communication channels. The message was short and simple. It said that humans had warned the Council. Next time, they should listen to those warnings. Next time, they should take human words seriously, instead of assuming that numerical superiority guaranteed victory. As the lieutenant transmitted the message, Lisa thought about what would come next. The Council would be furious. They would feel humiliated. They would want revenge for this defeat. They would probably send more ships and start a larger conflict, but they would also be afraid. Fear was good. Fear made people cautious. Fear made people think twice before attacking. Maybe fear would make the Council reconsider their demands and threats. Maybe fear would make them leave humanity alone. Or maybe fear would make them more aggressive and determined. Lisa had studied enough history to know that powerful organizations did not like being challenged. The Council had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years. They had never faced a species that refused to submit to their authority. They had never lost a battle this badly to such a young civilization. The other human ships held position around the Valiant. 19 vessels total, all of them ready for the next fight. All of them crewed by people who understood that they had just started something much bigger than a single battle. They had proven that humans could fight. They had proven that human technology could match Council technology. They had proven that determination and unconventional tactics could overcome superior numbers. Lisa opened a fleet-wide channel and spoke to all the other captains. She told them they had done well. They had followed their orders perfectly. They had executed Echo Protocol exactly as practiced. But this was just the beginning. The Council would respond with more force. More ships would come. Bigger battles would follow. She told them that humans were not looking for war. Humans had come into space hoping to find friends and trading partners. But the Council had demanded submission. They had demanded tribute. They had demanded control over human expansion and human freedom. Those demands were unacceptable. Humans had tried diplomacy. They had tried negotiation. They had tried compromise. The Council had rejected every attempt at peaceful coexistence. The Council had insisted that humans accept their terms or face consequences. Well, now the Council was facing consequences of their own. Now they were learning that threatening humans was a dangerous mistake. The other captains acknowledged her words. They understood the situation. They were ready for whatever came next. They were ready to defend human space and human freedom no matter how many Council ships appeared. Lisa closed the channel and looked at the stars on the view screen. Somewhere out there, the Council was receiving news of this battle. Somewhere out there, alien leaders were realizing that humans were not going to surrender. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing. The Valiant and its escort fleet set course for their next patrol area. They had work to do. They had trade routes to protect and colonies to defend. They had shown the Council that humans refused to negotiate from a position of weakness. Now they had to be ready for the Council's response. Whatever that response might be, humans would face it standing tall and fighting hard. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had turned into complete chaos. Holograms of species representatives flickered across the chamber as everyone tried to talk at the same time. Their translation devices struggled to keep up with all the overlapping voices. Some representatives were shouting. Others were making threatening gestures with whatever appendages their species possessed. The chamber had never seen this level of disorder in its long history. Counselor Ixon slammed his clawed hand down on his console hard enough to crack the surface. He yelled that it was impossible. The entire Krovan fleet had been destroyed by a single human patrol group. How could such a young species possess this kind of devastating military capability? His scales flashed red and orange with rage and confusion. Ambassador Velshara had spent the last 3 days reviewing every piece of intelligence the Council possessed about humanity. She had barely slept. She had studied human history files and cultural databases. She had watched recordings of human behavior and read analysis reports from multiple species. The picture that emerged from all this research terrified her more than anything else in her long diplomatic career. She spoke up and tried to bring some order to the chaos. She explained that the Council had never paid proper attention to human history. Everyone had looked at Earth and seen a species only 200 years into space exploration. They had assumed this meant humans were peaceful and inexperienced. They had assumed humans would be easy to control. Every assumption had been completely wrong. Velshara activated a display showing Earth's historical timeline. The images showed centuries of warfare and conflict. She pointed out that humans had been at war with each other for their entire recorded history. When they were not fighting external enemies, they were fighting each other. When they had no enemies at all, they invented reasons to fight. They had perfected the art of killing long before they ever left their home planet. She explained that by the time humans achieved spaceflight, they had already survived multiple conflicts that nearly destroyed their entire civilization. They had built weapons capable of rendering their planet uninhabitable. They had faced extinction multiple times through their own actions. Yet somehow they had survived and continued advancing. This was not normal behavior for most species. Council Speaker Tharn waved one of his appendages dismissively. He said that many species had violent pasts. This was not unusual. Most civilizations matured beyond such primitive barbarism once they achieved space travel and encountered other forms of life. Humans would be no different once they accepted Council guidance and learned proper civilized behavior. Ambassador Velshara felt her sensory fronds curl in frustration. She asked if humans really would mature past their violence. She pulled up footage from the battle at Deneb system. The recording showed human ships appearing out of nowhere and destroying Krovan vessels with ruthless efficiency. She told everyone to watch carefully and see how humans actually fought. The footage showed no honor duels between ships. No formation warfare where both sides lined up and exchanged fire. No territorial displays or warning shots. The humans had hidden their ships using stealth technology. They had ambushed the Krovan fleet. They had struck with overwhelming force at the weakest points in the enemy formation. They had shown no mercy and given no quarter. Velshara pointed out that these were not the tactics of a maturing species learning civilized warfare. These were the tactics of apex predators. These were the methods of a species that fought to win at any cost. Humans did not care about fighting honorably. They cared about surviving and defeating their enemies. Everything else was irrelevant to them. A new voice cut through the debate. Ambassador Krell of the Parath Dominion stood up slowly. He was one of the Council's founding members, and his voice carried the weight of 6 centuries of authority. Everyone in the chamber fell silent when he spoke. He said that the solution was obvious. The Council should commit its full military might against the humans. The humans had perhaps 500 warships spread across all their colonies. The Council could field 10,000 ships from its member species. The numbers made victory inevitable. Velshara felt genuine fear when she heard these words. She spoke urgently and told Ambassador Krell that such an action would be a catastrophic mistake. The worst mistake the Council could possibly make. She begged the chamber to listen to her reasoning before they made any decisions. Ambassador Krell turned his ancient eyes toward her and told her to explain herself. He wanted to know why crushing the humans with overwhelming force would be a mistake. The Council had used this method successfully for thousands of years against other rebellious species. Velshara took a breath and spoke carefully. She quoted a human saying that she had found in their cultural databases. The saying was that if you strike at a king, you must kill him. She explained that this meant if you attacked someone powerful, you had to destroy them completely. If you failed to completely annihilate them, you would face an enemy who was now convinced that total war was their only option for survival. She brought up more data on her display. The information showed human industrial capacity growing at an exponential rate. Every human colony was designed to be self-sufficient. Every colony had weapons manufacturing capability. Every colony was heavily defended. The human population was also growing rapidly compared to most council species. Humans bred much faster than the average galactic civilization. But the most critical factor was something the council had not seen in 10,000 years of galactic history. Humans innovated constantly in warfare. Every battle they fought, they learned something new. Every engagement, they adapted their tactics. Every defeat made them study what went wrong and fix it. Every victory made them analyze what went right and improve it further. Velshara explained that 3 months ago humans had ships that were barely more advanced than chemical rockets. Today their ships could match the best vessels the Council possessed. In 6 months, human ships might actually surpass Council technology. The rate of advancement was unprecedented. No species had ever developed new military technology this quickly, and the Council had given humans the motivation to pour all their resources into military advancement. The Council had threatened them. The Council had tried to control them. The Council had made them believe that building warships was necessary for survival. Humans were now building those warships as fast as their industrial base allowed. Counselor Ixon interrupted and said that Velshara was speaking as if humans were invincible. He pointed out that just months ago, humans were barely past chemical rockets. They were primitive. They were weak. They could not possibly stand against the combined might of 47 different species. Velshara turned to face him directly. She said that 3 months ago, humans were barely past chemical rockets. That part was true. But today they were matching council ships in combat. Today they were winning battles. Today they were refusing to negotiate because they believed they could win a war against the entire council. And after reviewing all the available data on human capabilities and human psychology, she was no longer certain that belief was wrong. The chamber fell into shocked silence. No one had expected a council ambassador to suggest that humans might actually be capable of winning. The idea seemed absurd. Yet everyone had seen the footage from Deneb. Everyone knew that the Krovan fleet had been destroyed in minutes. Ambassador Krell considered her words for a long moment. His scales shifted through several different color patterns as he thought. Finally, he asked if Velshara was suggesting the council should negotiate with the humans after all. Should they simply accept human terms and abandon their authority? Velshara said no. She was not suggesting immediate surrender. She was suggesting that the council should consider very carefully what would happen if they escalated this conflict and still failed to defeat the humans completely, because right now Commander Jack Hayes and the human leadership meant exactly what they said. Humans were refusing to negotiate. They were not refusing out of weakness or ignorance. They were refusing because they genuinely believed they could win a war. She added quietly that after studying everything available about human history, human technology and human psychology, she was beginning to think the humans might be right about their chances. At minimum, the cost of defeating them would be enormous. The council would lose thousands of ships. Multiple species would suffer massive casualties. And there was no guarantee of victory at the end. The chamber remained silent as everyone absorbed the weight of her words. Finally, a vote was called. The motion to authorize limited military action against human space passed by a narrow margin. The council would send additional fleets to enforce their authority. They would blockade human trade routes. They would make an example of humanity to show other species what happened when you defied council edicts. As the session ended and representatives began leaving the chamber, Velshara remained in her seat. She could not shake the feeling that the council had just made a fatal mistake. They were about to learn something that she already understood from her research. Humans did not respond to force with surrender. When you threatened humans, they did not back down. When you tried to intimidate humans, they became more determined. When you pushed humans, they pushed back harder. The council was about to escalate this conflict, and the humans would escalate right back. The difference was that humans had shown they were willing to accept casualties and losses in pursuit of their independence. The council had not faced a real war in thousands of years. Council species had forgotten what war actually cost. Velshara gathered her documents and left the chamber. She would follow the council's orders. She would support the military action. But privately she began preparing for the possibility that the council might lose this war. She began thinking about what the galaxy would look like if humans won their independence through force. She began considering how other species would react when they saw that the Council could be defied successfully. The Council had just escalated against humanity. Now humans would escalate back. And the Council was about to discover that escalation was something humans were very good at. Admiral Greg Morrison stood in the command center buried deep beneath the surface of Luna, Earth's moon. The facility had been built into solid rock hundreds of meters below the surface. It was designed to survive almost any attack. Around him, dozens of officers monitored displays showing the deployment of every human military asset across 27 star systems. The map looked like a spider web of glowing lines and icons. Each icon represented ships, stations, defensive platforms, or military installations. Commander Amy Sullivan looked up from her console and reported that intelligence was receiving data from the outer colonies. Council forces were mobilizing all across their territory. The analysis teams estimated that between 4,000 and 6,000 warships were moving toward human space. The Council was preparing for a major military operation. They were coming with enough force to overwhelm humanity through sheer numbers. Greg studied the tactical display with calm focus. He had spent 30 years in the Terran Defense Force. He had started as a junior officer on a patrol ship and worked his way up through the ranks during humanity's expansion into space. He understood military numbers better than most people. On paper, this upcoming battle should be a complete massacre. The Council had at least 8 times as many ships as humanity possessed. Any reasonable military analysis would predict total human defeat. But Greg also understood something more important than numbers. He understood humans. He understood how they thought and how they fought. He understood that humans did not give up just because the odds were against them. History was full of examples where humans had won battles. They should have lost. He asked about the status of something called Project Anvil. Commander Sullivan reported that the new shipyards at Proxima Centauri and Tau Ceti were fully operational. They were now producing 12 combat vessels per day across all human manufacturing facilities. Project Anvil's main construction facility was ready for activation and awaiting his orders. Greg nodded and gave the order to activate Project Anvil immediately. He wanted the first wave of new ships deployed within 72 hours. Every shipyard should run at maximum capacity. Every factory should prioritize military production. Every resource should be directed toward building the fleet that would defend human independence. Commander Sullivan mentioned that some council members were calling for negotiations again. Ambassador Velshara from the Krovan Collective had been particularly vocal about finding a peaceful solution to the conflict. She had sent multiple messages asking for human representatives to meet with her privately to discuss alternatives to war. Greg acknowledged that Velshara was intelligent. She understood what was about to happen better than most of her colleagues. She could see the future more clearly than the other council members. But her understanding came too late. The council had made their choice weeks ago when they seized human colony ships and imprisoned human diplomats. You did not get to bully someone and then ask for peace talks when they started punching back. That was not how this worked. He turned to face everyone in the command center. His voice carried to every officer present as he explained something important. He wanted them all to understand the true nature of what was happening. The council thought this was a limited military action, designed to force humans back to the negotiating table. They believed they could apply enough pressure to make humans accept council terms. They were completely wrong about their assumptions. This was actually the moment when humanity would decide whether they were going to remain a free species or become subjects of an alien empire. This was the moment that would define human existence in space for centuries to come. Everything they had worked for since leaving Earth depended on the outcome of this conflict. Greg pointed at the tactical display showing Council fleet movements. Those ships represented 47 different species. Most of them had been traveling through space for thousands of years. They had better technology in many areas. They had more resources. They had vastly more experience with space warfare. The Council had every advantage except one. Commander Sullivan asked what that one advantage was. Several other officers looked up from their stations to hear his answer. Greg allowed himself a slight smile. He said the advantage was that humans were meaner. The comment brought nervous laughter from around the room, but Greg continued more seriously. He explained that humans understood something the Council had forgotten after 10,000 years of civilized warfare. War was not about honor or tradition or following ancient rules. War was not about demonstrating cultural superiority or proving philosophical points. War was about winning. War was about using every advantage you possess to defeat your enemy. And humans were extremely good at winning when their survival was at stake. He pulled up a new tactical display that showed detailed attack plans. The screen displayed strike routes targeting Council supply lines, communication hubs, and lightly defended logistic systems. The routes avoided heavily defended military targets. Instead, they focused on the infrastructure that allowed the Council fleet to operate far from home. Greg explained what was going to happen next. The Council fleet expected humans to defend their core systems around Earth and the nearby colonies. They expected humanity to gather their ships into defensive formations and wait for the attack. That was what civilized species did according to traditional warfare doctrine. But humans were going to do what humans always did when faced with a stronger enemy. They were going to attack first. The tactical display showed dozens of planned raids against Council territory. None of them were dramatic fleet battles. None of them targeted military strongholds. Instead, they systematically dismantled the Council's ability to wage war at this distance. Supply depots would be destroyed. Fuel stations would be captured or sabotaged. Communication relays would be eliminated. Transport ships would be intercepted. Every logistical element that kept the Council fleet operating would become a target. Greg explained that the Council wanted a negotiation. Humans would eventually give them one, but it would happen on human terms at a time of human choosing. It would happen after the Council had learned that fighting humanity cost more than it was worth. It would happen when the Council was ready to accept human independence, rather than demanding human submission. He looked around the command center at the faces of his staff officers, young and old, veterans and newcomers. All of them wore the same expression of grim determination. They understood what was being asked of them. They understood the risks. They understood that some of them might not survive the coming conflict. But they also understood that this fight was necessary. Greg told them that humanity had not come into space looking for war. Humans had hoped to find friends and trading partners among the stars. They had hoped to learn from older civilizations and share knowledge. They had hoped for peaceful coexistence with other species. But the Council had given them demands instead of friendship. The Council had given them threats instead of cooperation. The Council had made war inevitable through their arrogance and assumptions. Now the Council was going to learn why making humans fight had been a terrible mistake. They were going to learn that human technology advanced rapidly during wartime. They were going to learn that human determination increased when threatened. They were going to learn that humans would pay almost any price to remain free. Greg dismissed the officers to return to their duties. As they moved back to their stations and began implementing the attack plans, he looked once more at the tactical display. The Council fleet was moving into position around human space. They were confident in their numerical superiority. They believed thousands of ships guaranteed victory. They were about to discover that in human warfare, superior numbers just meant bigger losses. They were about to learn that humans had been preparing for this fight, while the Council had been making speeches. They were about to find out what happened when you pushed a species that refused to surrender. The command center hummed with activity, as officers coordinated fleet movements and finalized attack plans. Ships across human space received their orders and began moving into position. Weapons were armed. Engines were powered. Crews prepared for combat. The largest military operation in human history was about to begin, and Greg watched it all unfold with calm confidence. The Council had started this conflict. They had demanded submission. They had threatened human worlds. They had imprisoned human citizens. Now they would face the consequences of those decisions. Now they would learn that humanity meant every word when they said they refused to negotiate. Now the galaxy would see what humans could do when they decided that fighting was better than surrendering. The tactical display updated as human ships began executing the first phase of operations. Stealth vessels moved toward Council supply lines. Attack squadrons positioned themselves near communication hubs. Raiders prepared to intercept transport convoys. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The war had truly begun, not with a dramatic fleet battle, but with systematic destruction of the enemy's ability to sustain operations. Not with honorable combat, but with ruthless efficiency. Not according to Council traditions, but according to human methods. The Galactic Council was about to receive an education in how humans actually fought wars. It would be an expensive lesson that they would remember for a very long time. 6 months had passed since the Council fleet first entered human space. Ambassador Velshara stood in what remained of the Council logistics hub at Kepler Station. The structure itself was still intact, but everything inside had been systematically stripped. Every computer system had been wiped clean of data. Every storage facility stood completely empty. Every ship that had been docked at the station was gone. The humans had been here 3 days ago, and they had taken everything that could be useful. It was the 17th such raid in the past month alone. Velshara walked through the empty corridors and felt the weight of what was happening. The humans were not fighting to destroy the Council. They were fighting to make continuing the war completely impossible. They were not attacking military targets. They were attacking the supply chains and logistics networks that allowed Council fleets to operate so far from their home systems. Her aide followed behind her carrying a datapad. He pulled up the latest casualty reports and read them aloud. Council losses had reached 40% of all forces committed to the conflict. Human losses were estimated at only 20%, but Admiral Morrison kept deploying new ships faster than humans were losing them. The Council analysts could not understand where all the new human vessels were coming from. Their intelligence had estimated human shipbuilding capacity much lower than what they were actually seeing. Velshara understood what the Council intelligence officers did not. While Council shipyards had been building vessels the same way they had for thousands of years, humans had completely industrialized their warfare. They had built automated shipyards. They used modular construction where parts could be quickly assembled. They had standardized components that worked across multiple ship classes. Humans were not crafting elegant vessels meant to last centuries. They were manufacturing weapons on assembly lines. Speed and quantity mattered more than beauty and tradition. The aide continued his report. The Council was meeting in another emergency session. Speaker Tharn was calling for increased military commitment. He wanted to send even more ships and apply even more pressure. He believed that overwhelming force would eventually break human resistance. Velshara said quietly that Speaker Tharn was a fool. The Council had already lost this war. They simply had not admitted it yet. They were too proud to accept the truth. Too stubborn to acknowledge their mistake. Too invested in their own superiority to see reality clearly. Her aide looked shocked by her words. He asked how she could say the Council had lost. The Council still had more ships. They still controlled more territory. They still had more resources. On paper, they were still winning. Velshara turned to look at him. She explained that wars were not won on paper. Wars were won when one side decided that continuing to fight cost more than accepting peace terms. The Council had passed that point weeks ago but refused to admit it. Every day this war continued, the Council lost more ships. More species suffered casualties. More resources were consumed. More infrastructure was destroyed. And for what? To force humans to accept terms they would never accept? She told her aide to request permission to open a direct communication channel with Admiral Morrison. It was time to stop this madness before both sides destroyed each other completely. It was time for someone with sense to make peace before pride killed thousands more on both sides. 12 hours later, Velshara sat across a conference table from Admiral Morrison in neutral space. The human admiral looked tired, but his eyes were still sharp and focused. Behind him stood Commander Jack Hayes and Commander Amy Sullivan. Both of them maintained formal military posture, but Velshara could sense their readiness for action if needed. Admiral Morrison greeted her politely. He said that he had been told she was one of the few Council members who understood what would happen if this conflict continued. He respected her willingness to seek a peaceful solution, even though it went against the majority opinion of her colleagues. Velshara acknowledged his words. She said that she had studied humans more carefully than most Council members. She had tried to warn them. She had tried to explain human psychology and capabilities, but the Council had not listened until it was too late. Now she was here because she believed that continued conflict served no one. The Council was prepared to discuss terms of peace. Admiral Morrison repeated her word choice. He said discuss, not negotiate. Not compromise. Just discuss. His tone suggested he had noticed the careful language and understood its implications. Velshara's sensory fronds drooped slightly. She admitted that the Council was not approaching from a position of strength. She acknowledged that humans had proven remarkably effective in warfare. She said that surely there was still room for peaceful coexistence between humanity and the Council species. Morrison leaned back in his chair. He explained that 6 months ago there had been plenty of room for peaceful coexistence. The Council had decided there was not. They had demanded submission. They had threatened trade routes. They had seized colony ships. They had imprisoned diplomats. Now the Council wanted to talk about peace because they were losing. That was the problem with the Council's approach. They were not here because they had learned their lesson. They were here because the war was going badly for them. He activated a star map display on the table. The map showed human space and surrounding systems. He explained that these were humanity's terms. Humans would have complete autonomy over all systems within 50 light-years of Earth. No Council oversight. No tribute payments. No guidance on expansion. Humanity would maintain free trade relationships with any Council species that wished to engage in commerce. Humans would respect Council sovereignty and Council space, and expected exactly the same courtesy in return. Velshara began to say that those terms were extremely generous considering the circumstances. Morrison held up his hand to stop her. He said he was not finished explaining. His voice became harder and more serious. Any Council species that attempted to restrict human expansion would be considered hostile. Any species that threatened human colonies would be considered hostile. Any species that interfered with human trade would be considered hostile. And humanity would respond to hostile actions accordingly, not with diplomacy, not with negotiations, not with carefully worded protests. With military force applied rapidly and without mercy, Morrison leaned forward across the table. He said the Council needed to understand something fundamental about humanity. Humans had not wanted this war. They had come into space hoping to find friends and partners, but the Council had shown humans that they needed to be prepared for conflict at all times. The Council had taught humans that other species could not be trusted to respect human freedom. That lesson had been learned thoroughly. He explained that every human colony was now an armed fortress capable of defending itself. Every trade ship carried enough weapons to destroy a heavy cruiser. Humanity had militarized their entire society because the Council had taught them it was necessary for survival. That militarization was not going away. It was permanent. It was the new reality of human civilization. Velshara felt a chill run through her body. She said that what he was describing sounded like a permanent state of warfare, a society built entirely around military readiness. That was not normal or healthy for any civilization. Morrison corrected her. He said it was not a permanent state of warfare. It was a permanent state of readiness. Whether it became actual warfare depended entirely on whether the Council could learn to leave humanity alone. If Council species respected human independence, there would be peace and prosperity for everyone. If they continued trying to control or threaten humans, there would be war. The choice belonged to the Council, not to humanity. He stood up from the table, signaling that the meeting was coming to an end. He told Velshara to take these terms back to her Council. They could accept the terms and everyone could move forward peacefully, or they could reject the terms and discover exactly how much worse this war could become for all sides involved. Either way, humanity was done negotiating from a position of weakness. Humans were done asking for permission. Humans were done accepting threats and ultimatums. As Velshara prepared to leave, she understood with perfect clarity that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. For 10,000 years, the Council had maintained order through diplomatic pressure, backed by overwhelming force. Any species that did not comply was isolated, pressured, sanctioned, and eventually brought into line. The system had worked perfectly for millennia, but humanity had called that bluff and won. They had shown that determination and innovation could overcome numerical superiority. They had proven that willingness to accept casualties could defeat technological advantages. They had demonstrated that unconventional tactics could beat traditional military doctrine. More importantly, they had shown every other species in the galaxy that the Council was not invincible. The Council could be defied. The Council could be fought. The Council could be beaten. The Council would accept humanity's terms. Velshara knew this with certainty. They had no real choice. The alternative was continuing a war they could not win at a cost they could not afford. But accepting these terms meant acknowledging that a young species had defeated the established galactic order. It meant admitting that Council authority had limits. It meant accepting that the galaxy had changed forever. As her ship departed for council space, Velshera composed her report to Speaker Tharn. She chose her words carefully, but the core message was simple and undeniable. The council had pushed humanity too far. They had demanded submission from a species that would never submit. They had threatened people who responded to threats with violence. Now everyone would pay the price for that mistake. The price was nothing less than the end of the galaxy as the council had known it for 10,000 years. Other species were already watching what humanity had accomplished. Some would seek human protection and alliance. Others would copy human military tactics and industrial methods. The carefully maintained order was fracturing. New power structures would emerge. The age of unquestioned council dominance was over. A new era was beginning, and it had all started because the council had refused to accept that one species simply would not negotiate on anyone's terms but their own.